What if I told you about a weapon that you can't even see? A weapon that's, well, it's all around us. It doesn't explode, it pours. Yeah, for 5 whole years during the Vietnam War, the US military was literally using the weather as a weapon. This was a top secret program, and it would end up changing the rules of war forever. So let's talk about the story of Operation Popeye. So back in 1974, Senator Claiborne Pell said this. And, he wasn't just talking about making it rain. He was getting at something much deeper. Secrets, power, and, the totally unforeseen consequences of trying to play God. Really makes you think, right? What does happen when you open that box? And get this, he didn't just say this in some public debate. That quote, it comes directly from this document, a newly declassified transcript of a top secret Senate hearing. That's really what this whole story is about. What happens when a secret this massive finally sees the light of day? Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in a Senate subcommittee on oceans and international environment. The date is March 20th, 1974, and the topic on the table was this: rumor. Something that sounded like it was straight out of a science fiction novel, a secret weather war. So these senators, they're there for one reason: to get to the bottom of a military program that had been running for 5 years, a program that cost millions in taxpayer dollars and was done completely in secret, without Congress or the American public having a clue. They were there to investigate Operation Popeye. So to really get what this was all about, we have to rewind and go back to the jungles of Vietnam. See, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that was the logistical lifeblood for the North Vietnamese forces. It was this whole network of paths and roads they used to move supplies. And the US military? They came up with a brutally simple idea. What if we could just wash it all away? And that simple idea led to the program's unofficial motto, which is just chillingly direct: make mud, not war. I mean, think about that. The goal wasn't just to cause a little trouble for the enemy. It was to literally manufacture monsoons to soften roads, cause landslides, and bring their entire supply chain to a grinding halt. Okay, so how on earth do you even do that? Well, the science is called cloud seeding, and it's actually been around since the 1940s. The basic idea is pretty simple, actually. You just spray these tiny particles, like silver iodide, into a cloud that's already full of moisture. Water vapor then latches onto these particles, the droplets get heavy, and boom, they fall as rain. But what made Operation Popeye so different, so historic, was that this was the first time cloud seeding was used systematically as a weapon of war. So here's what a typical mission actually looked like. You'd have these specially modified planes flying these covert weather reconnaissance missions out of a base in Thailand. They would fly right into these big, moisture-rich monsoon clouds. Then they'd release these canisters full of silver and lead iodide. This acted as a catalyst, basically forcing the clouds to dump way more rain for way longer over very specific targets, like the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And you really have to grasp the scale of this. This was not some small, one-off experiment. No way. This was a sustained, 5-year-long military operation with hundreds of secret missions. It all started with a secret test back in October '66 over Laos, which the Department of Defense called outstandingly successful. That was the green light. By March of '67, the full operational phase kicks off. Now, here's a really key detail. In 1968, they stopped the rainmaking over North Vietnam itself, right along with the bombing. But, and this is a big but, the operation secretly continued over Laos and Cambodia for another 4 years, all the way until July of 1972. And a big part of how they kept it a secret for so long was by giving it all these different cover names. It wasn't just Operation Popeye. No, depending on which document you happen to be reading, you might see it called Operation Motorpool or Intermediary Compatriot. Just layers of secrecy. Different names say more. So what did all this cost? About $3.6 million a year. Now, that might not sound like a huge number today, but back then, that's over $23 million in today's money. And all of it was paid for by US taxpayers who had absolutely zero idea that their money was being spent to weaponize the rain. But, a secret of this size, it can't stay buried forever. Sooner or later, the truth starts to leak out. And in this case, it was drip by drip. When the questions first started coming, the official denial was just absolute. Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird went before Congress and told them in no uncertain terms that a program for tactical weather modification didn't even exist. flat out denied it, period. But then, in 1971, an investigative journalist named Jack Anderson published a column that just blew the whole secret wide open. His reporting, plus some details that came out later in the Pentagon papers, well, that's what forced this whole issue into the public spotlight and eventually right onto the Senate's agenda. And the level of secrecy here was just staggering. I mean, the DoD didn't just mislead Congress, they actually withheld information from a National Security Council panel, a group that was specifically created to study this exact kind of thing. Even during that 1974 hearing, officials who were testifying admitted they were under explicit instructions not to talk about what happened in Southeast Asia. And for Senator Pell, this was the real heart of the problem. He actually compared the cover-up to Watergate. And as he saw it, it wasn't really about the rainmaking itself. It was about the secrecy, the constant denials, and what that says about a government's relationship with its own citizens. So once this story blew up, the revelation of Operation Popeye sent shockwaves far beyond that hearing room. It created a legacy that is still affecting international law and scientific debates to this very day. The most direct result? Well, that was the 1977 Environmental Modification Convention, or EMOD. This was ratified by the United Nations, and it expressly bans using the environment itself as a weapon. Just think about that for a second. A secret program, once it was exposed, led to the creation of brand new international law. And you can see the shadow of Popeye looming over today's debates about geoengineering. Now, while Popeye was tactical and secret, aimed at a specific battlefield, modern geoengineering is talking about strategic, global-scale stuff. The technology is obviously way more advanced, but those fundamental questions about control, about consequences, the ones Senator Pell was asking back in '74, they are more relevant today than ever before. And that question of oversight, of who's watching the watchers, it's still a live issue. A recent report from the Government Accountability Office found that NOAA, that's the agency responsible for tracking weather modification in the US, isn't fully meeting its responsibilities. This creates, and I quote, an incomplete picture. Sounds familiar, right? It's an echo of the very same secrecy that defined Operation Popeye. Which, brings us right back to where we started. Because even with all the declassified documents and the hearings, some of the most crucial questions about Operation Popeye, they were never really answered. I mean, how effective was it really? Was it the outstanding success the early reports claimed? Or was its impact, as senators were later told, basically unverifiable? Was it truly the only program of its kind? And who gave the final order? The official story points to the Department of Defense, but some sources have always alleged that the CIA and maybe even Henry Kissinger were involved. The complete truth about the secret weather war, well, it might still be classified.